Let's ask the so-called Dean of Valuation, Aswath Damodaran, NYU's Stern School of Business. Good to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
I mean, I think we're all looking at the same market and maybe coming with different conclusions. What about these mega cap stocks? I mean, when you grade them, what do you give them?
I think one of the reasons it's so difficult to arrive at a consensus here is when you look at the market caps, and they clearly, I mean, they're at levels we haven't seen with any company in history, 5 trillion, 4 trillion. At first sight, you think that's way too high a number. There's no way. But it actually turns out that every one of these companies at the $1 trillion market cap plus has a pathway to get there. It's plausible. And I think that's at the basis for why there's so much disagreement. It depends on how plausible you see that pathway is. To give you an example, take NVIDIA at a $5 trillion market cap. If they can maintain their existing nosebleed margins, 53% net margins, return on equity in the triple digits, they can get there with 600 billion in revenue, which is not a big deal. I mean, they're at 170 billion already. With 20% growth, you can get there. So the people who are upbeat about NVIDIA are seeing a plausible pathway there if they can do that. The question is that probable? And that's where the disagreement comes in. And I think that's why it's got to be personal. It's not something that you can hear from other people. You got to look at the numbers and say, I can live with this. I can make this assumption and be okay with it. And every one of these companies, I think, has a plausible pathway to get to the market cap they're at. And, as long as that's there, you're going to get disagreement about these stocks.
I think what's really provocative from you today in terms of your notes to our producers is that you put forth that this is not the bifurcated market that some would paint it to be, that the remaining 493 are also trading, in your mind, hefty multiples of earnings. Explain.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you take the 7 out of the S&P 500, look at the rest of the market, it's trading at 22 to 23 times earnings. And you could argue that the remaining 493 companies have much less rosy operating metrics than the Mag 7. They don't have the kinds of margins and the growth that the Mag 7 have. So when people talk about this being a bifurcated market, they act like the Mag 7 is essentially they're the only ones that are overvalued. The rest of the market somehow is fairly valued. I don't think that's true. This is a richly priced market across the board. And if you factor the differences in margins and growth, I'm not sure the remaining 493 are bargains relative to the Mag 7. They look pretty richly priced to me as well.
What looks undervalued to you, if anything? Presumably you've thought about that.
That's why I said coming to a conclusion that the Mag 7 are overvalued, the rest are undervalued, is going to be tough to do because everything's been pushed up. It's like a rising tide. And with the Mag 7, you have this added oomph of high growth plus high margins at scale. I mean, that's the amazing part. Is they're growing when there are 150 billion, 200 billion, $250 billion revenue companies. That's, I think, almost unprecedented. And the market is factoring that in, rewarding these companies. Whether they can keep doing that becomes the area of disagreement, because I think that things only get rockier and more difficult from this point on. You saw that when Google announced that these new chips that compete with NVIDIA chips, you saw the sharp sell-off in NVIDIA. I think you're going to get more shocks like that to the system, and the question whether the story can hold up.
What does your own portfolio look like these days? You've never really been shy in sharing the moves that you make. Could you do it again?
I'm down to 5 of the Mag 7. They're there because they've been there, and they're not overvalued enough that I want to dump them. I did, sell off the rest of my NVIDIA shares just recently, and I think that was the last segment of NVIDIA. And if it continues to go up, all the more power to people who continue to hold NVIDIA. But for me, I think I've gained enough from its rise that it'd be greedy for me to hang in there and say, give me more.